All right, how are you guys? So, what should a river be? This is a question that we think about constantly at Urban Rivers. You know, how do you make something benefit your economy, the environment, your community? So I'd like to thank you guys for taking the time to actually come and see what we're about and really walk with us through this journey. Now, the theme of this master series is connecting people and the built environment with the natural world. And in Chicago, you know, we have a lot of built environment, but the natural world is much less. And we're trying to find ways where we can, utilize the existing infrastructure to build wildlife habitat. You know, how can we even out these and make them live in harmony? So by about 2050, 2 out of 3 people are going to live in cities. So the need to actually bring nature into urban environments is just going to increase. So rivers are an extraordinarily important part of most cities' development. You know, they were an economic driver for a lot of places during the Industrial Revolution. And Chicago is no different. During the turn of the century, we basically dredged our rivers, widened them, put seawalls on them, and made it really efficient to move goods throughout. But in doing that, we've also lost something, some of the natural habitat that used to be a part of the city. You know, our Chicago is named after the smelly onion, and we've lost all of that naturalness that used to be part of the river, you know, for the detriment of, or benefit of our noses, I guess. But, you know, so if you look at this site right here, you see the river bustling with boats. This is something which you will not witness in our river and in a lot of urban waterways throughout the world. We don't use these channels like we used to. The purpose of them isn't to just move goods anymore. So that kind of ushers in the second phase of the river and the second real use. Now, during the 1900s, we in Chicago actually reversed our river with the purpose of allowing us to dump sewage in the water without, you know, poisoning our drinking water. So this effort, and it kind of speaks to how we treat our waterways and how our water systems and kind of the direction that we wanted to put them into at that time. So, you know, we put a lot of money and engineering into actually doing this job, and now we're kind of starting to see the effects of that, see how that is not necessarily what we want to do. So we're kind of in the third phase, which is where sewage is universally viewed as something you just should not dump into a river, no matter how much you hate St. Louis. So the MWRD, the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District, has been working on a project for a very long time, which is called the Tunnel and Reservoir Plan, TARP, which is basically the idea that when you have sewage that has to go in the river, instead of just dumping it into the river, you dump it into some sort of reservoir that then it can then be treated and then dumped into the river. So it kind of shows how we're starting to regret some of the decisions we had before and how we're trying to usher in this next phase of our waterway. So the North Branch Canal, Goose Island, this is where our project is located. It is on the east side of Goose Island. And you can see here it's unusually straight right there. So in the mid to late 1800s, we decided to actually dredge that completely and build this canal to make it more efficient for boats to move, among other reasons. So this whole area that we're working in is both a natural and an unnatural place, which is a really interesting dichotomy to work in. So, yeah.
With this industrial, influential past of the Chicago River, you can imagine that it's in pretty poor health today. That said, it has improved, though, over the last 40 years. Things like the Clean Water Act of the 70s, as well as consistent efforts from local groups, have really helped improve water quality. In the 70s, there were 7 fish species in the Chicago River, and today there are about 70. So things have certainly improved, but the river still faces several threats. You all are probably very aware of the battle we have against single-use plastic and other more visible trash, But there are also issues like legal and illegal dumping of sewage and other materials into the river. And there's simply a significant lack of habitat today. Many Chicagoans don't know that when we just get 2/3 of an inch of rain, so not even a whole inch, in the Chicagoland area, our 2 water treatment plants get inundated. So everything you flush down the drain at home, at work, gets bypassed into the river. Add an inch to that, an inch and a half of rain in a short amount of time, and all that lovely sewage in the river gets drained right back into Lake Michigan, which is the drinking source of over 7 million Chicagoland residents. This sewage can contain some pretty gnarly stuff. Nitrates, phosphates, bacteria like E. coli, heavy metals like lead and mercury, and pharmaceuticals, many of which cannot be extracted through traditional filtration means. If you've been keeping up with the news at all on the Chicago River over the last year, there have been several controversial incidences. This was taken about a year ago. A contractor on the north side was caught red-handedly dumping site wastewater into the river. Although this was likely just mud and water, it hasn't been proven if there were other harmful chemicals or contaminants in that. There is an investigation going underway, but we really want to highlight how this sort of thing, even in almost 2019, still happens on a fairly regular basis. There is really very little respect still for this very valuable resource we have. So I mentioned nitrates in the water. Overnutrification is a big deal in freshwater as well as oceans around the globe. 2 of the top 5 sources of that actually come from urban settings, and they're municipal sewage and stormwater. As our cities continue to grow population-wise, more people will tax the already outdated sewage infrastructure of those towns, but also will increase the demand of non-porous pavements spreading out across the land. They will cover otherwise absorbent surfaces like soil, which can help mitigate the effects of the more frequent rainfalls we're experiencing. So with those 2 combined, all that rain that collects everything on our streets and our sidewalks gets funneled into these drains, amplifying this issue. And then thirdly, as you can see, this is what much of the shoreline, if you want to call it that, looks like along the Chicago River and other urban waterways. It's 8 to 10 foot tall sheet piling as well as crumbling concrete. Doesn't look great, and it doesn't allow many organisms to thrive alongside it. To add to that, as Nick mentioned, a lot of the river was dredged for shipping purposes. These were all industrial efforts. So as we look to the future, and we really started to develop this wild mile concept, we knew that we needed a very simple and straightforward yet multifunctional solution.
So how do you take something that looks like this, plain, lifeless, industrial, and turn it into something which is a bountiful resource for a city? How do you take something and turn it into a piece that is a crux of a community, that's something which enhances the natural environment and brings plants and animals together that otherwise would not be there? So this is the ethos of the Wild Mile. The Wild Mile will be the first ever mile-long floating eco-park located right here in the Chicago North Branch Canal. It basically boils down to a real simple solution. Build for wildlife first, and you'll create something really great. So a little overview on how we got here. It started out with one of our co-founders, Josh Yellen, and he did a thesis on floating wetlands and how they affected fish habitat in the Chicago River. So he put out a 5 by 10 foot raft unit in the river, moored it to the edge of the North Branch Canal, and basically monitored the fish numbers underneath compared to open water and underneath the dock to see what had more fish, what the diversity was like. and so on. And what he was able to see is that there's a statistically significant amount more fish underneath the floating wetlands than underneath the control. So this nugget was enough to inspire us to keep moving and see what could happen if you were to populate more of the river with these types of things. What would happen if you took the ecological needs of the Chicago River first and built around that? So in 2017, we installed phase 1, which was a 1,500 square foot floating garden in the Chicago River. And this is the beginning of the Wild Mile vision, an urban wildlife park in the heart of Chicago. It serves as a destination for both wildlife and humans alike. The way that we were able to actually get this in is through the help of the community. Kickstarter specifically, we were able to get over 300 people to donate to actually put this in the water and bring this vision to life. As well as that, we got some other sponsorships from some other local retailers nearby, Patagonia included, which was great. And it helped us really test this vision out and see how this would react in the water. Now, this whole project is kind of a big experiment. So what we wanted to do is introduce a variety of different species of plants. So we put 60 different species of plants in this garden, with all of which had different purposes and means. So we had things that were pollinators, which we wanted to attract, bees and dragonflies and other things. We had plants that were, prairie plants, traditional prairie plants with very large root systems. We even tried food on a small section just to see how the food would grow, and once we tested it, if it was even edible. It wasn't really that edible, but it still tasted okay. But so we were able to see, kind of how all of these things played out in real time and learn off of that and help apply this then to the broader vision. So if you want to look at how the system works, you can see underneath in this graphic, we have the fish underneath and the roots hanging down. So the way that this system is we use a supplier called Biomatrix, which supplies these floating wetlands, which have, you basically plant the plants in the rows. The roots then grow right through this small coconut coir device and into the water. And it uses the nitrates, the phosphorus, and all the other nutrients in the waterway as its fertilizer source. It grows large root systems, which then provide structure for fish and bacteria underneath the water to grow in. So you get fish that actually eat the roots, they hide in the roots, and they even breathe in the roots, which is fantastic to see. On top of which, you have plants that are growing into really lush gardens, which foster a lot of life for different birds as well as insects, really catalyzing the ecosystem in a place which previously was fairly barren before. So each year, this is a photo that was taken a year after the first one. And what we were able to see is how well these plants grow into nutrient-rich waters. We're able to monitor that and then see how we can then improve that year after year and expand this idea out to more areas. So on top of that, we're thinking, okay, well, we have something that works. How do we get more people to it? How do we make this a real attraction for everyone in the city? So that's phase 2, which is the learning platform. So this is an installation which will actually allow people to walk down onto the gardens and get up close and personal, allow students, families, as well as just residents to be able to get out and enjoy the river from a vantage point which previously was fairly difficult to achieve. So the floating classroom, okay? We did a project with the British school where, we'll get into it in a little bit, but basically the students were able to design ecosystems and learn about them. And we found it was extraordinarily inspiring for the kids as well as for us doing the project, which was great. And we wanted to see, how do we take that experience and expand it out? How do we make it more accessible to people in Chicago? So this is where the floating classroom kind of came in. Where we designed a platform that's large enough where you could bring an entire school group down, a class of about 30 kids down, to actually get into the water, get into the to the weeds, if you will, interact, monitor plants, conduct experiments, assess those experiments, and really contribute to kind of this whole dynamic park. As well, we needed more access. So it's something which really is lacking in Chicago and in a lot of rivers in general. But you get these walls that are built for large boats. As you saw in the image earlier, 8, 10, 12 feet in the air for larger boats. It's not really made for kayakers, for canoers, for the occasional swimmer. It's really, it's kind of, there's a large barrier to entry, an 8-foot one to be exact. So to build a section which actually allows access, so allows people to touch the water, to get up and close, is really nice. In the area that we're in, it's about an hour-long walk to get to the nearest public access, which is, it kind of makes it implausible for somebody to be able to enjoy the river on a daily basis. So this we're hoping to change with this phase 2 installation going in May. So the section that we're located is this North Branch Canal. Here's a nice little overhead shot of it, and you can see our gardens down there as well. The thing that makes this such a perfect place to pilot this project is that it's first not very used by commercial boat traffic. You have 2 barge operators who operate north of it. This section in particular hasn't been dredged in many years, so it's about 5 feet deep or so. So you can't actually get large boats in there. As well, all the bridges that used to go up now are sealed, so you can't get boats through there. So it makes it really kind of this nice canvas to try something new and creative with this. On top of that, Goose Island and the area around is changing. Traditionally, it was a planned manufacturing district, so it was zoned for industry. There's a trash facility right next door, but they're starting to change those regulations and starting to loosen them up, which will allow more mixed-use development as well as residentials to come in, which brings in new people who demand new things. Now they don't need a river that's easy to load barges onto. But they need some more recreation places. They need some more open space, and they need more wildlife in their life. So that's where this kind of comes in.
At Urban Rivers, we approach all projects with a wildlife-first mentality. The Wild Mile is not excluded from that. So as we work to build this really unique, cool attraction, we want to ensure that not only will biodiversity, water quality, and just the area improve, but the community, the economy will also benefit. This is going to be the first mile-long floating park in the world, right? It's also going to be the first ever mile-long floating filter. As you can see in this image, as the roots from these plants dangle down into the water, they can really stretch to quite a bit of length. If we're talking just prairie plants and wetland plants, it can range anywhere from a foot to about 5 feet or so. What that does is as dirtier water enters from the north of the North Branch Canal and passes through, these plants, simply by being there and growing, take in water. They also take in those nitrates and phosphates and other harmful chemicals and toxins that are in the water, rendering the water that passes through cleaner. So it exits on the south side significantly more improved. Remember, this is an experiment. This hasn't been done before. So we are using existing studies to benchmark off of, but we're also partnering with institutions like Illinois State University and Shedd Aquarium to better comprehend the overall effect this will have, particularly from a water quality standpoint. Numbers we're looking at, from a dissolved reactive phosphorus standpoint, we hope to see it be lowered by up to 82% and nitrates up to 92%. So this could have a real impact on, remember, that dirty water that's entering our freshwater drinking source, as well as the Mississippi on other days. From a community standpoint, as the river gets cleaner, the water quality improves, more people want to be by this awesome attraction, this destination, we expect retailers to see an influx of traffic. River-affiliated businesses like canoeing companies, boating companies, fishing companies, and so on will also see an increase in traffic. It'll also have benefits on people's pockets, as it's been proven that increased urban greenery, as well as parkland, encourages community members to be outside more, be it walking, exercising, riding your bike. They're taking in more fresh air and being active. It can save people under 65 up to $250 a year, and people over 65 up to $500 a year, because that activity and more healthy lifestyle is helping them reduce their risk at things like obesity, diabetes, and heart disease. Concerning our youngsters, it's been proven that getting them away from those screens on their phones and iPads, which are everywhere now, and getting them outside can actually reduce rates of ADHD. It can improve their creativity and also just improve their overall emotional and psychological well-being. So with all of these hopes and studies and initiatives we want to kick off, we are very aware that we need to form the right relationships to implement but also monitor them.
So far we've had a lot of good success. People like this project, which is fantastic to see. We've gotten good media attention. We had a front page article in the Tribune not too long ago, which was real nice to see. As well, we were able to see a lot more people signing up to volunteer and actually finding out ways to contribute, which is extraordinarily exciting because it shows the need of this project in the broader context of Chicago. People want to be a part of something happening, and this is a really unique project that is happening. So it's exciting to see kind of the reaction. Our team is made up of a group of passionate core team members, volunteers, interns, who put lots of time into actually making this thing a reality. We have many people on our team who work full-time jobs and then still put in 20 to 30 hours a week on urban rivers, trying to make this thing a reality, which is extraordinarily inspiring and is really helping us kind of bring this project to the next level that it needs to be. On top of that, we also have a group of river rangers who are dedicated citizen scientists who don't necessarily need to come from a background in science. So they're people who want to see the change. They dedicate the time to go out every week and actually monitor the plant growth, the biodiversity, gather key pieces of data in water quality and see how this project is actually working in its environment. The data that we then collect influences our decisions moving forwards and helps us figure out how we actually scale this thing to be from our first installation, 1,500 square foot. How do we keep scaling this out to be something that works on a mile-long river park? On top of that, we have students who are getting involved. And I wanted to show you guys this video that we did with a local elementary school. Let's kind of highlight that.
One day, maybe Chicago could be famous for its river and all the nice wildlife here. It would be a million times better to study a healthy river.
There would be plants everywhere if this was a healthy river.
People just come and think they can just put their trash in here.
Ducks like to sit in the water, but they can't come back up to the land.
We noticed that there aren't riverbanks in this river, so we were just wondering what would be the best way to create one.
I hope that this project, this collaboration with Urban Rivers, will enable our children to realize that they have an important role to play in preserving the environment within Chicago. Taking the Chicago River, which has been narrowed into this corridor of metal, and adding back artificial riverbanks means the children can see how we can bring back the biodiversity to the river, and then use that opportunity to make meaningful learning experiences for our children.
The floating gardens are made of 4 long tubes covered in coconut husks to help them float. We put them in the river after filling them with mulch and native Illinois plants. The roots provide homes to the fish and also a safe spot for the fish to lay their eggs.
Since there is a huge variety of plants, it attracts a lot of new animals that used to be in Chicago. I've already seen some great blue herons, some ducks, and some American coots.
We are hoping to attract otters and snapping turtles.
We researched some plants that might reduce the pollution.
We want milkweeds and marsh marigolds because milkweeds attract monarch butterflies so they can have a place to rest while they're migrating.
One of the cool things is we'll get to monitor this over time and seeing if we see any of these animals on the gardens. And we could use that knowledge to then expand out and put these in other areas. They get to think about these problems as things that can be solved and try to think about when you see something wrong with something, how you yourself can change it. I think this is kind of a catalyst for doing some really interesting work in whatever fields you're going to pursue.
We don't need to go outside of the city to explore wildlife. We can attract it back to the city. It is a long-term project, so the children can go back every year and see their handiwork developing and improving the biodiversity of the Chicago River.
I'm excited to see the wild mile because I want to see how it changes through different years.
Most other schools, they don't get to do this, but I'm really glad that our school gets to come down here and explore what it's like.
Well, I think it's super important that everyone's involved in a project like this because the more people you have, the more of these planters you can get and the better it is for the wildlife.
So far this is 166 foot long, but this whole area, this channel is the mile. So that's the goal, is to get this whole area to become the wild mile. The work that the kids are doing in here is real science. You know, these are things that have not been done yet.
Being out of the classroom, you can interact with nature, learning science and about the animals and their natural habitats.
This is just the start of a long-lasting, fruitful relationship with urban rivers. It's a great way to break out of the classroom and build that community within Lincoln Park together.
Yeah, so one of the coolest parts about this and about, actually having these kids work on it is they're actually contributing to something that hasn't been done before. The things they're doing, the projects that they're building on haven't happened in this river or in urban waterways in general for the most part. So you're actually able to contribute to something that isn't just, busy work. You're putting things in that will have a lasting effect, and sometimes that effect is undetermined. And you're able to then monitor and see kind of how it evolves. So it's really one of my favorite parts, and I think an extraordinary, exciting part of this whole process. In order to do a project like this, you have to kind of build a team of people who want to see change in the river. And we were able to assemble a lot of different partners who kind of share our vision. So this includes research facilities like Illinois State and Northeastern, who are able to help us do actual active research on water quality and the biodiversity in the area. We have a partnership with the DPD to do the learning platform. So you have the city behind this project actually working out and doing a framework plan as well based on the Wild Mile. You have retailers who are nearby who are really excited about seeing this whole thing kind of evolve, as well as one of the museums, Shedd Aquarium, which is a kind of a partnership I want to highlight a little bit more in depth. So what Shedd has done is they built this Shedd River Island, which is a floating wetland in the river alongside our other wetlands. And they chose the different plants. We tested a couple different things out, including floating trees in the Chicago River. And we use that as kind of a touch point to bring the community in. So they had a program called Kayak for Conservation where anybody could come out one time and kayak out and learn about both the ecology in the river, but then actually conduct water quality and monitoring experiments themselves. So they would do things like take water samples that were part of that Illinois State University research, as well as do things like monitor fish traps, do fish counts as well, which is extraordinarily exciting because it gets people who might not have had any exposure to river ecology actually able to contribute to something that will eventually be published and kind of dictate how well this is working. So it's an extremely exciting place to be at, I think, and one of the places I'm real proud to be a part of.
So going off what Nick just said, with these new relationships being formed on a weekly basis, we find ourselves being very inspired to solve issues that prior to that relationship were unaddressable. So we are continuously pushing ourselves and our partners to really reimagine what a river can be, what can go in this wild mile, what will make it better. And we've come up with some really great projects. Earlier this year, we were all together and we realized that no matter how many people or volunteers, team members we sent out to the garden, there would always be trash. They'd pick up what was there in every nook and cranny, and then 2 hours later it was back. There were just too many ways for trash to get in and around the actual garden. So we realized we needed an always-on solution. That's when two of our very talented engineer volunteers helped us come up with this trash robot idea. What's awesome about this is it's the first ever user-controlled trash collection device of its kind. You just need a smartphone and internet access, and you can play this from anywhere in the world. And I say play because it's gamified the otherwise mundane, dirty, and wet process of collecting trash in a river. When we launched in April, we were pleasantly surprised as we quickly found out that the globe really cared about this same issue. We had companies, individuals, communities reaching out saying, hey, how can we get one of these or an entire fleet in our local waterway? Because they had the same issue as us. Their rivers were filled with trash. Another awesome initiative we kicked off this summer, actually, was the installation, and Nick alluded to this earlier, of the first ever floating trees in the Wild Mile. That is a pawpaw you're looking at right now, but we've also got river birch in the river today. They start off small. That's probably 2-3 feet tall, but it will grow to about a 10 to 15 foot large tree. This will have numerous benefits to the Wild Mile. One, due to its size, these trees will be the most powerful parts of that freshwater water filter I mentioned earlier. On a daily basis, if you compare a tree to a shrub, let's say, it will take in significantly more water and the toxins and whatnot around it. It will also add dimensionality to our garden. Right now it's very 2D. Things are fairly low to the ground. The tallest grasses grow maybe 5-6 feet tall. And by these trees being installed, they will actually add habitat to provide habitat to species that otherwise have none on the river. They will allow nesting area for birds, insects, and so forth, but also below the water surface. As remember, there's currently not a lot down there. So these large root systems will allow fish, bugs, all to breed, live, and thrive underneath our gardens. Going off of this 3D concept, we will also be installing the first ever vertical gardens on the river this coming spring. Most of us are from Chicago, and we're very aware of our rich architecture and art, culture, and history. We wanted to honor that. So we wanted to make sure that although we were installing these cool, tall, vertical structures, they could be functional from a nature standpoint. So in addition to these, we'll be installing some pieces of art, like sculptures, that vines and other quick-growing plants can be incorporated throughout. We also want to utilize Mother Nature's energy. An issue we haven't touched on is how there's very little dissolved oxygen currently in the Chicago River. And if you know anything about organisms like fish, they need dissolved oxygen to survive. They use their gills to suck it out of the water and breathe, literally. What this will do is harness the energy of the wind to turn a pump underwater to bubble. As the bubbles go up to the surface, they oxygenate the water around the area. This will also help resolve issues like bacterial outbreaks that thrive in low oxygenated ecosystems. Last summer, 2017, we actually had a really bad breakout of bird botulism or avian botulism, which decimated several dozen aquatic bird species or waterfowl. And lastly, as you can see on this map, most cities in the US and the globe are based on or near a waterway. Due to our industrial past, those waterways are likely not in great shape. So as we look to complete the Wild Mile in Chicago, this model, we are very conscientious of growing it to other markets. And when I say markets, I also mean different parts of the Chicago River, as we are very actively looking at expanding it to the South Branch. So the health of these cities is essential to our future, not only as a species, but on a global scale. We need to make sure they're multifunctional at several different levels. And the Wild Mile appears to be that potential solution.
So, in conclusion, I want you guys to think about where you're from or some river that you visited. And I challenge you to really rethink what that river could be. How would you work within the existing infrastructure to build ecosystem and help the community's needs? How do you turn a river and showcase it as an amenity to its numerous residents? How do you take a system which is designed for the needs of a city 100 years ago and then build something which will suit the needs of that city 100 years from now? How would you experiment? And how do you iterate? And how do you discover the needs of the river, of the ecology in the river, and of what the people need near the rivers? How do you protect the habitat in a way which lives in harmony with the built environment and the communities in it? Now, this project is not just Chicago. This isn't just for our 1 mile long section. This is an idea which could happen in many other rivers. And I'm hoping that this becomes an inspiration to other groups around the world to take that challenge of a river that's been neglected and disused, to take that and actually enhance it, turn it into something really beautiful. So we're Urban Rivers, and these are the ideas of the Wild Mile.
Thank you.
And so we're going to take some questions, and we're going to bring up
We've
our
got
head
2
of biology.
mics here and there, in case you want to stand up and ask a question.
Yeah, we have mics standing, yeah.
Please.
So this is Phil Nicodemus. He's the head of biology. It's great. Yeah. So yeah, any questions, just come up, raise your hands or anything. Yeah.
Would you mind speaking into the mic so everyone can hear? Thank you.
Maybe we can have someone pass the mic.
On the left mic, people backstage.
Okay. I know, yeah. It's the real deal here.
I don't believe I've ever been under the spotlight, so this is exciting. Thank you for the presentation. That was great, really interesting project. My question is, what was the role of the University of Chicago in the project?
Yeah, so we had a group, or Phil, you want to take this one? Or?
Yeah, so the University of Chicago was a cool little project. Basically, they have a one of those extracurricular clubs. It's a horticulture-based club. And so they came to us asking us what can we do kind of horticulturally to sort of beef this up. And our idea was you guys should design some sort of what we call habahacks, which are just small kind of DIY implements that you can put in the river that help out wildlife in some way, shape, or form. So it's this little group, kind of each person has a design for a different section of wildlife we might want to attract.
Do you know the name of the horticulture club?
It is just the Horticulture Club, I believe. University of Chicago Horticulture Club.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Am I allowed to ask more questions?
Please.
Please.
Okay. Have you involved the Friends of the Chicago River in the project?
Yeah, so Friends has been a helpful piece in this whole thing. Yeah, definitely. So we've gone and we've done some speaking things with them, as well as kind of collaborated on a couple different pieces of the project. But I think that as this kind of whole thing's developed, they're going to be a key stakeholder in
And
the process.
to be clear, the health of the river has significantly improved because of initiatives they've implemented. When I was discussing the 7 to 70 species in the river of fish, Friends was very involved in improving that water quality. And further north on the river, they've actually done a fair amount of shoreline habitat rehabilitation where there is actual shoreline. As you get up north, you get into like the Skokie Lagoons area and whatnot, and it becomes much more wild as it's outside the city. So they've done a great job, and have been in collaboration with us on some stuff.
Are there other people waiting for questions?
Oh, on the right, yeah.
But you can go ahead.
You can keep going, yeah. We'll be able to take them all.
Speaking of what you were just talking about, I had another question related to that. So I used to visit this one part of the North Branch of the Chicago River over by, where Hot Dogs used to be, that part of the river?
Yeah.
There used to be signs there saying, don't let the water touch your skin because it'll burn you because of the acid. Is that still the case? I haven't been to that area in a long time. Has it improved, or can the water still, like, what if the water touches your skin?
We've fallen in. And
Yeah.
no extra amenities or lost ones, you know.
Yeah, it's getting better. I mean, the real danger in the river is things like these, as George kind of alluded to in the presentation, when you have like a rainfall or rain event that happen and you get sewage in the water, you get things like fecal coliform, E. coli, and stuff like that, which is, that'll be what can get you sick. Touching the river itself, it's okay. I probably wouldn't drink it, but I don't mind getting it on me.
Yeah.
Unless I have somewhere to go afterwards, and then it's kind of a pain.
So you talked about the water getting a little bit cleaner as the water filters through the roots, which makes sense. Have you ever been able to do any water quality testing?
Yeah, so this is our partnership with Illinois State University, actually. Basically, what I do is I go out and I collect water samples about weekly, me and other volunteers. Basically, there's just a big contraption. It's like a big cylinder. You lower it down to where you want it in the water, and you drop a weight on top, and the container snaps shut. And so this way, you've kind of got, okay, here's this water sample from we do 1 foot and then 2 foot down, or we do surface and 1 foot down in the upstream area, surface 1 foot down midstream, surface 1 foot down downstream, and you kind of see as it passes through these roots, as it passes by our island system, if there's any removal of pollution from just passing by our roots, which is kind of what, that's the big driver behind this filtration, is this interaction. Not only, a lot of people think it's just the plants, a lot of times it's the microbes that are associating with the root structure that pull out a lot of this pollution. So this is kind of a holistic way of pulling out a lot of that. It's a big old river, and we don't have a lot of plants in there right now. So as you expand the plant to how much water you have, that effect gets bigger and bigger. Right now, it's sort of minor. Right now, it's not as big as you might like to see it, but as we add more of these, that effect should grow in size, definitely.
Thank you. And then also, what was the role of SOM on the project?
Yeah, so SOM has been a partner from this project really early on and has actually helped design these things. So that the layout that we have for the first one, as well as kind of this framework plan, is done by SOM. So they've been a real kind of important driver and kind of have believed in the project since real early on, before there was anything in the water.
And then I think lastly, have you had an opportunity to involve Chicago Public Schools? I think that would be a great project for CPS.
Absolutely. So I think we had a group from Burroughs actually come down, and we did kind of a kayak tour, as well as kind of teaching about the river and about some of the ecology aspects of it. Our project with the British school is something that will help us build out and expand to public schools. And then we're working on a curriculum that can then be, that meets all the requirements for public schools, that will then culminate in an actual field trip down to the Wild Mile. So I think that, the efforts we're taking is pushing towards that, but really the river is a public trust, it's everybody's. And we want to get kids from every school in Chicago to be able to be involved in a really significant way in this project, yeah.
And just to go off that, if this is going to stick around for the next 100 years like we hope, we need to foster that passion and interest in younger people right now. And by installing this really cool wildlife corridor in the heart of the 3rd largest metropolis in the US, you give kids a much easier access. And through these programs, like one of the most fun incidences we had this summer was Shed through another program, brought out 50 plus kids a couple times, and we made what we call seed bombs. And it's basically clay stuffed with native seed species. And we got one of those huge slingshots that 2 people hold, you pull back and you launch them into the river. And these kids loved it, and they were helping the river too, because as these seed bombs were launched, they disperse these things like milkweed and whatnot throughout the river system, which is in desperate need of not only habitat, but native species. We didn't really talk much about that, but we need to help those tremendously, as the native animals and insects that live around here need them. There are plenty of invasives that can choke out things like milkweed and whatnot. So these efforts are all essential in the sustainability of this actual park.
I think there's a lot of kids who probably don't even know that there is a river and have certainly never been there. So thank you for engaging them in that.
Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation and answering all my questions.
Oh, absolutely.
Thanks for your question.
Thank you.
To the right, please.
Hey, I'm Rob, from your friend from St. Louis.
Hey.
Hey, Rob.
Hope that jab wasn't too much.
Thinking about what you guys were talking about with drinking water, strategically, is this something that could be scaled for larger bodies of water? Do those larger bodies of water need this extra habitat, or are they left more natural and in good shape?
Yeah, so there is basically with anything that you're doing, larger bodies of water, the edges have less of an effect because the bigger you get, the more volume of water there is. So this, for instance, this is why the Great Lakes are so low productivity, because they have a big volume with not a lot of not a lot of stuff going into it. So this effect is definitely much better when you have something like, say, a smaller, like a wastewater treatment pond. A lot of the research that's been done on the ability of these to take up nutrients is based on small kind of closed systems, and that is where they're definitely most efficient in removing pollution. The bigger systems, however, you start to need that habitat so much more. So even if you're getting less of the water quality improvement, you're getting more value from the habitat that's being put in there, which, you know, depending on what you're asking about, depending on the water body, it could mean it badly. Maybe it just needs diverse types of habitat, things like that. So there's so many different questions that there are to ask, and there's so many different ways to go about it. Yeah, for sure.
Thank you.
No problem.
To the left.
Hi, awesome job, by the way. Thank you. My question has to do with trying to understand a little bit more about the trees. And the coconut hydroponics is easier to understand, but are you suggesting that the trees are also going to take root or be hydroponic?
Yeah, so those are essentially very much the same situation. The trees is just we have a bigger open central area for the root ball to sit in. So those two will be growing their roots straight down in the river. If you're talking about trying to put soils on these types of things, it would be very difficult to supply all the nutrients that those things need just within a closed, contained soil system. So these trees are nice because they will do the very same thing where they're pulling up those nutrients from the water body itself. So yes, they are hydroponic.
Okay, so you're hydroponic. So you had, based upon a ratio of the height and weight of the tree, you had a floating mechanism that mathematically would work out. What do you do when the tree gets taller?
Yeah,
go ahead, Nick.
As the tree gets bigger, so these units are all linked together. So as the tree gets bigger and heavier, the weight is kind of dispersed over the full garden. So basically, if it gets to a certain point, we just add more flotation onto it. So yeah, and eventually you could theoretically see a time where we have to trim it, but
we'll be trimming it.
We also did some experimentation with our supplier, Biomatrix, as they had never really built a tree module, as you saw in that image. It was a little elevated and there was a lip around it. That was built specifically from our demand, as we knew we would need something that was more buoyant as the tree accumulated mass. So as the tree grows, it'll sink slower and slower, but the hope is that it will still stay floating and won't be fully submerged as it's fully mature, yeah.
Hi, gentlemen. This is an awesome project. I am from the state of Mississippi, more specifically Hattiesburg. I had two questions.
Yes.
The first one is, how did you get everybody to buy in for this great idea? And secondly, what were some of your stumbling blocks? I mean, did you have any issues, major problems?
yeah, so, you know, when you look at how the river is and you kind of show people how the river is, people were able to really kind of get behind the idea of turning it into like a park or a floating garden. Like that, you know, that sell was not too hard for us. You know, people are like, well, I don't know anything that's going on in the river now, or at least that section of the river. This sounds like better than what's happening. So it was easy to get to that point. But, you know, we talked about 5 years ago, we have Josh Allen's study, and then in 2017 is when we actually launched. It took a long time for us to actually get permits to do this whole project. So that was probably the biggest stumbling block to get started. I mean, we deal with things every day now, it seems, but it took about two and a half years to actually go from being like, oh, let's do this, walk into City Hall thinking there's like some permit you fill out, to realizing like you have to actually get a coalition of the Army Corps, the IDNR, IEPA, MWRD, CDOT, property owners, and all that to all buy in, and everyone says yes, and then actually get something in. So that's like probably a huge stumbling block to begin with. And also, I think one of the biggest barrier to entry is for other groups who are trying to do projects like this. You know, it's just the bureaucracy you have to move through to actually get this change done is just, it's too much. And I think that that's something that, you know, if we went into it thinking, oh yeah, it's going to take 2.5 years, we might have been dissuaded. But, you know, fortunately, we thought it was like a month away for about 2.5 years straight. So, you know,
we've heard no a lot, and we're all just very determined. Like Nick described earlier, our volunteers and individuals who help out after they've worked the whole day are just so passionate about having this accomplished as they see the benefit. And it also took some growing on our part to really help like more corporate and city entities understand how this would be a good investment, if you will, on their part. You know, validate why contributing resources, funding, whatever the case may be, would be worth their while. And so we've had to evolve our pitch, if you will, to cater to specific needs of a specific stakeholder.
Yeah.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Absolutely.
Anybody else?
Any softballs or anything?
On the right.
Hi, I'm from Ross Barney Architects, and I worked on the downtown Chicago Riverwalk. We had some floating gardens there, as you probably know. One of the big challenges was to get people down to that water level. So it used to be, 5 feet or so, that old dock level, get it down to half a foot or so. I'm wondering if you're in your phase 2, you showed a sort of learning lab where it looked like people got to ramp down to that. I was wondering if there's some idea of incorporating a kind of river walk into this and how you might do it. For us, we had to do a land building exercise that had an act of Congress that allowed us to actually build land, change the navigable waterway and all that.
Yeah.
It looks like we don't really have an opportunity here, or if we did, it would be a very long-term plan. Is there a sort of floating platform idea or some other way to get people out into the gardens?
Yeah, so our whole thing is based on, floating platforms. So we have basically what are essentially docks that people will walk down onto, and that's then connected directly with the garden. So people are actually, as the water level moves up and down, they're standing on the piece that's moving up and down, which makes this a lot easier, I think, to do, to interface with. So that's kind of the approach we're doing, as well as, there's other things that can happen on land and around, but, the act of, pushing in is just, it's too much for this, too big a cost in this section.
And you see the all that green going down the right side of the island. You can see the green, but imagine like a layer of tan, if you will, accompanying it. There will be pathway stretching from North Avenue or the north side of Goose Island all the way down to the southern tip with access points, more ramps to increase access from community members and whatnot. So yeah, it'll be a park. It'll be multifunctional, not just one single learning platform.
Thank you.
Hi, this is fantastic. Something a little different. I'm wondering if you can talk about or thought about what I call the business model. It sounds like your business model now is GoFundMe. And I don't know how sustainable that is, but at least a couple things that came to my mind was you had that device that was somehow picking up garbage that people were interested in.
Trash by, yeah.
And maybe Pepsi wants to sponsor that for some reason, since it's their cans in the river. Have you thought about, I guess, innovative ways to fund what you're doing that could be replicable elsewhere other than start a GoFundMe campaign?
Yeah, so that's a tricky piece on this whole thing, and we're kind of wading through that as we go. Right now we're a 501c3 and we're basically sponsored by corporate grants and whatnot. But how do you make something that's really a public good and get it something that people will pay for? And we're trying to figure that out. With the trash bot specifically, there's a few different models you can do. One is like a corporate sponsorship model where you have branding on the website or whatnot, or branding on the bot, which actually we got a sponsorship from Mozinga, which they'll get a bot that's in their colors because of that. And then the other thing you could do with trash spots specifically is where kind of a pay to skip the line. So people basically, there's only one, it's scarce, so you have to wait to play it. So you can bid or donate to be able to go up. And so that's one model. But I think that, as we kind of expand this out and we look at other markets and other things, we're going to have to get kind of pretty creative to figure out how do we fundraise for these things in other cities and other markets. And so I think that in certain cities, there's entities that are willing to pay for it, city governments and things like that, who are looking to actually build these amenities, and we'll get the tax benefit of it and kind of have the incentive to actually pay for these. But in other places, it might be a little bit tricky. We'll have to work on exactly how that's executed.
We've also talked about garden section sponsorships. So you work for X company, you give us X amount of dollars, and we put in 10,000 square feet of floating garden in your name. So there, as Nick alluded to, a couple options we have, but throwing fundraising events, Kickstarter, and just the corporate and educational grants we've received thus far have been a majority of that to date.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Hi, this is really great. I'm curious about, there are a number of initiatives worldwide to reclaim formerly or polluted urban waterways for swimmers.
Yeah.
Like Plus Pool in New York, and there's one in Berlin on
Flussbad, yeah.
Flussbad, yeah.
Yeah, some of them use plant biofilters, some of them don't. But I'm just curious if you've engaged those groups at all and shared knowledge.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So we went to, we've been talking to actually both Flussbad and Plus Pool for a while, and we actually went out to Berlin to see what they were doing and kind of, learn from them, and kind of we share information all the time. They have an interesting, the Spree, the river that they're in, is much cleaner than the Chicago River, so it's closer to swimming. But in how their approach to it is really great and something that could happen in this type of system. I mean, they use just the natural filtration of plants to make it better to swim. So I think that, with our project, we're not alone in this. I mean, people all over the world are seeing the potential of taking these spaces and turning them into really interesting public amenities. So yeah, it's something that I think that all of us benefit from, all these cool things going on.
We've got about 20 seconds, so if you have a quick question.
Okay, quick one. Congratulations on the project.
Thank you.
I work in Mexico City, which was basically founded on top of a lake, and people used to live and farm on wetlands until 500 years ago when the Spanish came,
right?
and
Yeah.
they wiped everything out. So there's a part of the city which still has these canals, which are more than 500 years old, and it's a tourist attraction. And people go over the weekends. There are no power boats, no engines, and you get toured around the canals in wooden boats, and people pay a lot of money for that. And it's packed every single weekend for people from coming all over the world. So that could be a good idea. And if you guys are interested in going to Mexico City and looking at the way they used to farm these canals and use the wetlands 500 years ago, I'll be more than happy to share information with you.
Awesome, thank you.
Absolutely, thank you. That sounds great.
Well, thank you all again for coming out. We're glad to share this with you and hope to see you at the Wild Mile soon.